All right, my friends, I'm here with Ryan Dolan. Ryan is a recent graduate of strategic planning for life. He just completed his 8 weeks last week, right? Yeah,
hmm
last
This
week.
week, this
This
week,
week.
Tuesday,
That's right,
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Yeah. Had your final call on Tuesday and put the end cap on your strategic plan for life, your first strategic plan for life. So I'm really stoked to talk to you today, my friend, about the experience and get your reflections, your input, anything that you have to share that we can go over today. I'd love for you to do it. But my first question for you, Ryan, um, is I really want to hear the origin story. So, what was the catalyst for you in doing this work, doing the real work, and stepping into strategic planning for life? Was there something going on in your life that made this a really relevant and applicable thing for you to invest in?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. This is really cool.
Yeah, man.
Appreciate it. Love the program. Yeah, I mean that's a big first question. I think it wasn't necessarily like one moment that I had, but definitely over the last several years, just when you sit and think about things that you realize you know you make a lot of decisions based on the future. So everything's very future driven. How you're trained, I guess you could say, from
Yeah.
education, religion, parenting, how you're brought up. Everything is so future driven to just and production and achievement oriented.
Mhm.
And then I think in addition to that, another big reason is you realize that you do, you know, a lot of things because you think other people will like you. Like you care about
Yeah.
what other people think too much. Like I don't think I'm like huge into that, but you realize that if you stop and think about it, a lot of what you do, you are trying to impress other people. So I think there's a lot of other things that flow from that, but I think you can really tie it back to those two reasons is how you're brought up to be so future oriented and achievement and productive, and then caring too much about what like the proverbial they think. So I think I just as I've gone along, I've thought about that, and it just built up and got stronger, I suppose.
Did you have a lot of that before you started the program? Like, do you feel like when you once you started digging into yourself and realizing some of the things about your lifestyle or your mindset, did you find yourself unpacking some of that?
I definitely did. I think I've been going through how I manage my time, and I realized that it was definitely for sure you got to work first or do your to-do list first before you can ever play, like before you can do something fun or interesting or something like that. And that just goes, it was a realization of the whole future driven piece. So I've been working through some of that. I've gotten better in some ways, even leading up to and around, going through strategic planning. Um, but yeah, I mean, that was a big thing, was how I was managing my time was definitely going along with that future oriented piece.
Good, good. Yeah, I mean, that tends to be a big thing that I'm glad you brought that up to start. It tends to be a big thing that we talk about going through this program and us for ourselves too. I mean, I think every year you kind of, as you grow, you take on more of that stuff. And so you start to unravel from those shoulds that get caked on over time. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And I myself have experienced that. I mean, each time that we do that. So it's something that we jam on all the time. Um, I want to ask you another question. One of the things that we talked about prior to the interview was some of the reservations or barriers, like some of the things that you had come to you before jumping into the program. What were some of those, and like how did you get over them to actually commit to something like completing your life's plan?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because like it doesn't make sense when I say this, but because like you want to make some changes, you want to start making some decisions based on yourself and what you want to do, and a little bit less on the things I was talking about earlier. But then I think the biggest barrier was fear, because then I worry if I go through something and have like some third party accountability, and I go through something that's really comprehensive, that means like I'm going down that road, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna actually have to start doing some of these things. Otherwise, if I don't, then I'm gonna be like backing off of something I know I have been for a while, building up to like needing to do, which is
Right.
make some changes. So yeah, it was definitely a fear, even though it's like you have fear anyway that if you don't do these things, you're gonna like regret things later in life.
Right.
So then it's time to do it, and then you're like, well, I'm kind of scared because then I'm gonna have to do it, and that's scary. It's funny.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that too, because and I remember you mentioned that. I mean, we've talked about a lot, throughout the program as well, where you're like, there's no turning back. It's like the
Yeah.
Matrix where you're like, I'm gonna take this pill or this pill. Once I take that pill, there's no unseeing what you've done here. And now that you've got this stuff in front of you, you can start to see like, wow, I'm gonna do that. I'm actually gonna get into it
Hmm.
and start jamming on it. So talk to me about some of that then. So that's a good segue into the next question. When I think about um, some of the outcomes that you've seen from this, and let's start with the immediate outcomes, right? I'm really interested from your perspective. What were some of the immediate outcomes that you saw going through this program, or even shortly after you completed it this week? And you've obviously made some pretty large transformations in the middle of this. So what were some of those for you?
Yeah, I mean, going to how I manage my time has changed. I think I've become more efficient because now I know more clearly what to focus on. So there's some things I just don't do anymore, and there's some things I do more of,
Mm,
so that I make more time for. So I mean, little things, even just during the pandemic, and I'm sitting at this like not ergonomic spot in my basement, and like I spent hours, like I was cranking work during the pandemic, and I think a lot of people were like that, where they were working a lot
right.
more, and I was just so busy, meetings, deadlines, everything, where like there were times when, unless I had to get up to go to the bathroom or to just like quickly eat a sandwich, I would sit all day cranking in front of a computer. And
Wow.
recently I make a very conscious choice at least once, where I need to just go outside. I should go outside. Maybe it's taking a walk, walk around the block, or if it's my lunch break, go somewhere into a park or something like that.
Right.
And that's made such a huge, it's such a small thing, but
Right.
being outside and being active is so important to me that that's a really, big thing. Another example that's not really huge is I grew up fishing a lot. Um, and I've been getting more into it really within the last, like, since the pandemic started, really, I would say. But I make more time for it because it's like I've had such like great experiences doing it, and it seems like almost like a that's not a big thing you should make time for. It's like, who has time to do that? But it like fills me up so much, and I live like a mile from a river, and it's just like it's such a big part of you, and you growing up that you kind of lost. Like, why not bring it back? So that's another one. But those are just a couple of small examples of, you know, little changes that make big results. And I think we're going to get to some of the other things
Yeah.
that happened during this, that bigger changes. But yeah, it's been great. And another thing, going to like the things I don't do, I haven't as much like playing video games. I just don't do it anymore. There's no time.
Wow.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? There's
Yeah.
no time. There's no time to do it, and it doesn't help meet any of the criteria, the values, the intentions, all the things that you learn to do in the program. It just doesn't. There's no reason for me to do it, so I
So
don't
those
do it.
I love that, man. And the fact that you just brought that up, I think the what you don't do is just as important as the things that you do, or that you're continuing to do, or that you add to doing. So the things that you remove are just important. And that's actually one of the exercises in the program, is that keep,
Yeah,
add, remove.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
and so to be clear, were a lot of those what we call non-negotiables, like the fitness and the working out? It sounds like you weren't doing those, or you had like lost yourself in the gravity of work and the pandemic and the pressures that you were feeling from every angle. But now that you've reinvigorated yourself going through this, like you're finding yourself doing those things more regularly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I was being more. I was at a more inconsistent place than I had been, and now especially in the last 8 weeks, like during the program, since it's just so fresh in your mind going through everything and all the exercises. And I'll mention my favorites if you ask at some
Yeah,
point. I
dude.
mean, it was all great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like the non-negotiables, which was obviously a cool one you do right at the end, that helps you be more accountable. But I wasn't really doing those. And I, we were just talking a little bit before this, and I said, I did them all yesterday and it felt fantastic.
Yeah.
It just felt great. So yeah, that was definitely
Congrats, man. That's
yeah.
amazing. Hitting those non-negotiables every day to really fill up your energy bucket and then propel you to do what you need to do is so stoked, man. I'm so stoked for you. So talk to me, like, do you remember as you're going through the program, like when you started to see changes? Like, was it like a week, 2 weeks, like where you were like, wow, I'm starting to like feel different. I'm starting to actually find myself like moving towards those types of things, like my non-negotiables or fitness that was a big part of your lifestyle before that you reinvigorated through this? Was it pretty quickly that you started to get yourself back into that?
It's pretty immediate. Yeah. I think just by the time you go through the exercises and then you have your first clarity call, your mindset definitely starts to change because it's fresh. It's there. You're talking it out with someone else, which is something I had never really done before. Like I've, before I started this, I said I had flirted with some of this stuff on my own by myself, um, but never really got to talk it out. So really putting some focus, clarity, time, and attention to the exercises, having a clarity call, like my mindset shifted pretty quickly. So it's right there. So you're just looking at something, you're like, why am I doing this? Or, why am I doing
Yeah.
this? Or no, I really want to do this.
Yeah. This
Like, why
matters.
am I not? This matters. So I'm going
Yeah.
to do it, So yeah,
Right.
it was pretty immediate.
That's awesome, man. And you just said something too that got me thinking. Um, when you said, and I know this about you because of you going through this program and us having a relationship prior, but you had mentioned like that you had done a number of years of personal development work, and you use the term flirting with. Like I was flirting with these topics, I was flirting with the ideas and making changes and things like that. Twofold here. What made it difficult for you to like not go full in? And then was it different having a program and a guide to help you go 2 feet in and not flirt with it, but actually commit to the work that you just did?
Yeah, it made a big difference. I think what made it difficult to your first question was, for one, there's a lot out there and there's a lot of different perspectives.
Right.
Um, and when you're doing it together, you're sort of like trying to Frankenstein something you don't really have the full picture of.
Hmm.
You're trying to Frankenstein it together to sort of formulate sort of what your personal philosophy is, kind of a thing. And the self-help type stuff and personal development it's all great, but it's also, it's somebody else's perspective. You know what I mean? As opposed to a framework and you working through it, you're sort of listening to what other people think and trying to, and I'm the kind of, I get over analytical and I realize inconsistencies and I'm like, well, which one's the right way to go? Which one's the best? You know what I
Right.
mean? So that made it, you're trying to, doing something by yourself like that and trying to navigate so many different perspectives, books and podcasts and stuff like that, makes it difficult, but you're obviously flirting with the idea, the overarching idea and stuff like that. And I had like attempted to make values just like on my own. I'm like, I feel like I need to try to get more me centric. I just need to like, what are my values? So that was something I attempted to do. So it
Yeah.
was good. Yeah, it was good as I was going through it to realize like, okay, I was sort of on to
You're
something, but
trending. Yeah.
I
You're
was I
trending.
was on to
Yeah.
something.
You're
But
trending.
but at the same time, having the full framework and being able to talk through it and having that guidance to really comprehensively sort of start to finish, big picture down to daily action was big.
That's huge.
Was big.
With that guidance piece, because I think, especially, and I'll go maybe a little bit more. Maybe this is more my opinion, but I think as males, we have kind of that like fix it, do it yourself mentality, or that's what's been ingrained in us. What was that? I mean, that was so different for you because, like you said, like you were patchworking things together. You used the term Frankensteining. I mean, having that guidance and that perspective from someone who's not telling you what to do, but rather soliciting you to go further into your own exploration. Did you find any like unknowing or unexpected benefits from that?
Oh, big time. I mean, for one, it was empowering because it was still up. There's the framework, there's the guidance there, but I still had to do it. So like
Right.
I'm still doing the work. But the other thing is just between maybe what I wrote down in some of the exercises and what came out in our clarity call conversations, like either you or Krista would just like pull things out of it. Like there was one time in the very beginning, she's like, yeah, I was reading all this and we were talking and she was just like, and I realized this is a common theme throughout. Did you realize that? And I was like, huh, no. So it's, you get another set of eyes on it, but so like, that's the guidance part of it. But like, it was still up to me to work through it. But some of that, having those discussions was
Mm.
like incredible.
Yeah, man. Thank you for sharing that. And I think too, I mean, and just to close the end on that opinion that I shared with you that you then so eloquently answered, that guidance piece, like having a mentor, having a guide, for myself personally, like I've over the last few years, like been heavily invested in getting those perspectives, whether it's through peers like yourself, who go through this program with us, and then we share friendship outside of that, or if it's, formal mentors, like having those people really change my perspective. I think it's such a benefit that it's invaluable to have that kind of transference of knowledge and opportunity to glean wisdom. So thanks for sharing that, dude. That was big. That was big.
Absolutely, dude.
So I want to talk to you about your biggest change. So you had a pretty big shift happen almost smack in the middle or just before the middle of the program. And I assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that thing that you're about to share with people was another big impetus for you coming into this work, was that you were being hit with this opportunity and you were at that point where you didn't know what was the quote unquote right choice for you, but you felt something inside that was like unrest. Share a little bit more about that experience and like what happened, man.
Yeah. So definitely wild experience. Yeah. Right when we were getting into everything. Yeah. So gosh, where to even start? I mean, it sort of hit me by surprise for one. Like I wasn't expecting this opportunity to necessarily come up. And just for a little context, it was to go back to within the same company, but go back to a department I was previously at in a new position, um, to get some like management experience and stuff like that, and get to branch off and do some new stuff and have more autonomy and stuff like that. And yeah, when I started to evaluate it, is when like the work have gone through now, like what I was going through, like really bashed up against how I was previously like bred to think, which was super interesting. So like there was a lot of friction there, but luckily, going through some of the stuff we were, and a lot of the beginning parts of the program is about awareness. Like I could see the conflict within myself. Didn't
Right.
make it any easier. It was still very stressful, but
Well said.
yeah. So I mean, thanks. You're
I think
like,
it's
well said. I'm like, thanks, man. No, it's just,
I think what you just said is really important to clarify for everybody that's going to watch this video is you were, to put it simply, like you were provided an opportunity, a career opportunity that really was laced with other, benefits, right? It was, you know, equal or more pay. It was, more allure and power. It was more aligned with your thoughts of what you needed to be
yeah,
in the role and position that you've taken, practicing law. And you had the chance, which is why I think you summed up so clearly. You had the chance to really evaluate that decision based on your new criteria that you created inside your strategic plan. And in that moment where that choice was presented to you on a silver platter, you said, I don't think that's going to align with where I need to go. Right? I mean, that's what happened.
that is what happened. And it was, I came to the realization after going through it all and, even talking it through with you guys, that like the better vantage point for my future, like all things considered, values and intentions and stuff like that, I came to the ultimate realization that this position was going to be a good thing for me. And I'm not talking bad about where I was sitting. I wasn't looking. It was a great opportunity somewhere. It was a direction I was headed for a long time.
Right.
And that's why it was one of those moments where it was like, well, that's not part of the plan, Mr. Future Driven and trajectory to sort of pivot and go this way.
Right.
So to sort of change that inertia in my brain to sort of this new way of thinking was super interesting. I told when I told my now former boss that I'm going to take the opportunity, which was a really, for one, I like labored over it because my boss has been unbelievable, and she was great. And we had a really good conversation sort of leading up to that. But when I said, no, I'm excited for this experience, I think it's going to be very good for me for various reasons. I just like, when I hung up the phone, I just sat in my office, which is something I never would have done before, by the way. I just sat there. I'm like, what am I feeling right now? Like, what is this? And it was a very interesting, odd, different feeling that I didn't really experience before. Because it was one of those moments where I was just talking about sort of the changing away from sort of the future driven trajectory to like, no, you had this new framework, you evaluated it different, now you're going this other direction. Like, I would have along that way, obviously my ego that's going down the future would always sort of, I call them clap back. I would have this idea and it would just try to shoot it down.
Yeah.
I had this moment where my ego was just like, what just happened?
Amazing.
What? It was like a suspended in time, like, wait, you did it.
You transcended ego.
What? It was like, maybe that was it. I don't know. But it was a surreal, like just 5-minute experience being quiet in my office after that happened. Super interesting.
That's such an amazing story, my friend. And every time you tell that now, I get goosebumps thinking about that moment of you sitting in that chair, because it was transcendence, man. Like what you just said was, we are all so tugged by these visions that are usually propelled by ego, right? That these shoulds, these you have to be's, these maybe even these things that are just more aligned with these tracks that we take in life, right? Like you had talked about that during the program where you were like, I felt like I had to go on this track and become this thing, where then you uncovered, I don't want to, and I don't need to be that thing. I actually want to go this direction. And I'm imagining you, every time you tell that story, I just imagine you sitting there and I can just like see your ego like outside of you looking at you like, whoa, man, this is what we do. Right. And you're like, this is what we do now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It was like that. It was like, whoa, you usually come around and do what I tell you to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now this is what we do. This is such a beautiful story. Talk to me a little bit about that friction. I want to know. So like when you were in the middle of that huge transition, right? Like, and this is where I think people are going to get a lot of value from this, from you and your stories, because I think a lot of us and a lot of people that are attracted to this program and to strategic planning for life are highly successful people, have successful careers. They've been doing it for some amount of years, and you're presented opportunity all the time. But you were presented this opportunity and you felt that friction, that tension between what this was going to be versus where you now were going. What were some of those criteria that you inked newly for that new plan that then you honored, that were in conflict with where you thought you were going?
So, I mean, there's probably a lot of things. I mean, one thing that helped change, I mean, in terms of, if I'm understanding your question correctly, like sort of that new way of thinking and what helped solidify that, like what took me in that direction.
What was, so
I mean,
those value propositions or those things that were now aligned with the direction you wanted to go, that you felt that you would have to compromise otherwise. You had put some new things down in your plan that you were like, it's not going to propel me in that direction to do some of the things that I want to do. What were some of those, if you feel comfortable sharing clearly?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big relationship guy. And what I was doing, not to say I wasn't building good relationships, because I was, but this other opportunity helped me. Honestly, from a management standpoint, I get to build relationships with people and work with them to make them better. Like growth is important to me, as opposed to the other side was probably more of a, I'm not saying like a power thing, but it's, your attorney, you're doing all these important things. Oh, the big deal, you get the big deal done. Like there's stature to that, I guess you could say.
Right.
Even though I think like that, maybe that was part of it. But I went into more of a I like to have more space in my time and autonomy in my time to figure out all the things I need to figure out. And that more closely aligns with, it gives me space to live out my values, which one of those is freedom. So autonomy helps with that.
Yeah.
Meaningful relationships is one of them. That was huge for that. Um, it really hit on every single one I have, which I have 10.
Yeah.
It says choose 5 to 7. I had
You
10.
felt 10, so you have 10. That's amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, man,
That's
there's a
good.
lot. That's a whole discussion in and of itself,
Yeah,
probably.
I agree. I agree. Because that, I mean, that experience that you shared um, with us as you're going through it, and then just recapped for everyone else what's going to watch, like that's the gold mine, right? Of having this way of thinking, having this like new strategic plan for your life, so that you can, in those moments of good opportunity, or of trying times, of tough opportunity, you can really look at every situation and align it with those criteria and say, no, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Even if some of the things that are like allure and power, or where the status like exist, you're going to say, well, I'm just not going to be that guy. Like I'm not going to be that person, because that doesn't align with where I want to go.
Yeah.
And I think
And it's
like,
so freeing to be able to do that. Like that's the disconnect. There's still that moment where I'm like, are you sure?
yeah,
Because it's what you're supposed to do. It's like, well, no, it's not. And so it's a completely different way of making decisions. It's subtle at times. In this case, that was a big thing, going through my values and sort of like compare and contrast. But it changed that inertia from future driven, egoic default state of thinking, I guess you could say, is what I call it, to this sort of intentional, mindful, value, life intention driven decision making. It legitimately caused me to make a big life decision. So,
yes. And
yeah,
I will again formally and publicly give you massive kudos for executing that. I mean, you were halfway through the program, coming just out of the awareness phase, and brought it to the table and used that work in your life like immediately, my friend.
mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's going to be the story that we share of you, and that now you've shared with everyone else around your journey through this, is that you learn this stuff about yourself. You intentionally crafted where you wanted to go, and then when you had the opportunity, you made the decision in alignment with that plan.
Yeah,
And that is the hardest part. The hardest part is to actually look at what you've done and make a practical, challenging, fear-driven life decision to get to where you need to be.
mm-hmm.
And you did it, man. I mean, you're doing it. You're continuing to do it, which is amazing. So kudos again. I know I've said it probably 100 times to you already. So kudos again, my friend.
I appreciate it. No, I mean, it means a lot coming from both you and Krista. You guys are great.
Thanks, man. Um, I only had a couple more questions for you to be conscious of your time. One of the things that I'm really curious about is the ongoing work that you'll do, and maybe some of the practical things that you've gleaned from this process. So, talk to me a little bit about what you've pulled from this that you'll continue to do actively in your day to day. You had mentioned earlier non-negotiables and things like that. That list you now are going to be looking at every day. But there are other things that have come from this program that are going to be very practical in terms of execution and integration in your day to day.
Yeah, I mean, all of it. I mean, for one, I want to do this the whole process, because there's exercises you wouldn't necessarily do on a day to day, like, you know, I mean, absurd list. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Although I should revisit more than annually, but doing stuff like that. So I want to do it. I want to continue this work to continue to progress, which is what you're supposed to do. But from a day to day standpoint, I mean, the action planning that's set up for me for going through this, like when we had that talk, because you're the action planning guy. We started in this big philosophical place, which I love, and I've been there doing all the crap I've been doing on my own. But we got to the point where we were done action planning and talk about practicality. Like you're like, you do realize we sat there and you're like, I have five, out of the life intentions, I did annual intentions, and now I have, so action planning or whatever. So you're like, you do realize you can get what started well down these roads, like within a couple of weeks, right? And I started laughing, like I like a lighthearted, just like like relieved laughing, because it's like, yeah, it's, I guess what my point is you realize that you go through all those things and how you want to live your life and make intentions, that like when you get down to it and you action plan it down to that level of practicality, you're like, I can do that step tomorrow and the step after that, either the day after or the week after. And you're like, it's right there. It's right there.
Right in front of you.
There's no more, there's not a book that's going to tell me
No.
what it is anymore. It's like, you figured it out. There it is. Do it today.
You just isolated what I think is the most beneficial part of this program. I mean, I think, my wife is the owl. She's the wise introspective, and I'm the key, the momentum and integration. And that combination is the power, right? But what you just talked about is so huge. And I want everybody to hear that, is that you started with this, like these big unlocks, and you narrowed it down to these things, which was what you were scared of, that you're going to hit this wall and be like, okay, now I got to do these things, and you're doing them. But when we got done with that call, your biggest intentions that you had outlined in your life were narrowed down to these 5 things that you wanted to action this year. You narrowed them down to this for your annual intentions. And we looked at that list, and I was like, all the things that you want to achieve literally could happen in the next 14 days.
Yeah.
You could set all of those up. You could set all of those up and then experience those over the next 12 months with a little bit of effort up front. And I think that's the most powerful thing, is that you saw that, and we worked through that together, where you were like, holy crap, like I can do these things, like you said, immediately. I can do them immediately. That's fantastic, man.
And just to take it to like sort of, Tom was tying that back to like my original point about like fear, and how like I had like the fear of like not living out life how you want to, like on your deathbed, there's things you want to do differently, versus like, oh, if I do this, I'm kind of scared because I'm going to have to do it. Like that weird thing. At the end, you realize like, all right, there it is. It doesn't look so, if you break it down to step by step, it's not so bad. It's right there. You can understand it. So would you rather do what's in front of you that doesn't seem so scary anymore? Not that it's not, there's excitement, there's many things, but it's right there. You can see it. Or do you want to fear something later in life because you didn't do the thing that you could do today?
Ooh, well said, man. No regrets, right? Like, no.
That's, at the end of the day, I mean, that's peace of mind. You don't want to regret something later in life. Like that's the worst possible thing that could happen.
Yeah, and like that question that you just posed, like, is it more scary to not do it, or is it more scary to action the things that are right there, that you will hit some adversity on, and you'll have to learn and grow, and you'll be challenged, but which path would you rather take, right? That life by default, or the life of intention? And you're living that life of intention, my friend. You're living it.
It's weird. Yeah, I am now.
You
It's
are.
weird. It's weird to be on the other side of it.
You say confidently now. I am. Like, I'm living that life now.
Yeah.
There's no unseeing. So because we both have these massive smiles on our face, we are living that life of intention. We've gone through this program many times. You're getting ready to go through it this year for your first time, and you'll continue to do it, hopefully, for the remainder and the duration. What would you tell someone that is considering this? Like, what would you tell someone that is on the fence as you were 8 weeks ago coming into the program? What advice would you give them?
I mean, obviously do it. If you're the kind of person that's looking into to making your life, better for yourself. And it doesn't have to be, the most profound, like you're going to do some kind of monumental, you're going to be the next, Facebook startup person or anything like that. Like some of the things you end up really needing and wanting to do that make a meaningful change are actually pretty small. But they do make a big difference. It sounds trite, but it's true. So if you do want to make some things that are more on your terms and feel good about it, and feel confident about it, because you were guided, but you were still empowered to do this yourself. You built, you were given the structure, but the infrastructure, but you built it to your own self, and you want to be more intentional with something and see things differently. Like I said, maybe in small ways. It's absolutely worth it. And it's fun. It's fun to go through. It's cool to sort of take time and talk about bigger things and things you want to do. And it kind of, frees your mind up a little bit. It's awesome.
That's cool, man. Well, thank you. I mean, every time we get to talk, not only hearing your feedback today, these words of affirmation and these kind words of your reflection on the process, like it just fills me up. Thank you, man. Thank you for sharing your reflection. Thank you for leaning into your fear and doing this work for yourself. I mean, I'm at the end of every time we get to do this with someone, to talk to someone who's now like smile ear to ear and
Yeah.
realizing these things that they didn't know they could do and that now they're doing, it just matters. It's why we do what we do, and I'm super grateful for you, man. So
I
thank you for being here with me today, dude.
yeah, I would say thanks for having me, and I appreciate everything. It's been a great couple of months.
All right, guys. Well, you just heard Ryan's story, his reflection after his 8-week journey through strategic planning for life and onward. He's going on to the next phase and continuing to do stuff. Probably bringing his partner in life into the work with him as he goes.
Working on it.
Working on it. Thanks again, Ryan. Appreciate your time, man. And we'll talk soon, brother.
Sounds good. See you later, Phil.